Remember back in the good old days when we just had CSS and HTML, and we could write our classes in CSS, and then we could go into the HTML and say this element should have that class. So we add it here, and it's added, and it works, and everything is great. Or at least it was, because now is the day of JavaScript and interactivity, and we usually don't add the classes by ourselves, but it's done. For instance, when I click the blue box, it should add the class falling, and it didn't. It wrote something in the console, but it did not work. And then my question is, what didn't work? It doesn't work. How do I figure out what went wrong? And my procedure is always, I'm asking myself 4 questions. Did the class get added? Did it get added on the correct element? And there's a sub, is it on the container, on the sprite? And is it really the correct class? Is it the class that I want? And then finally, does the CSS really work? And in this short video, I'll show you how to examine each of these questions. And the first question is, did the class get added? And if I just expand my browser window here, I can make a lot more space for myself. And then I can see, if I inspect this one, the container, the class falling, it does not say class falling here. Sometimes the HTML can be a bit hard to see everything, so I recommend this element classes function, where you can see what classes do we have. I don't have any. If it had the class falling, it would say falling, and now it's also working. So if the class isn't here, if you can open this and say it doesn't have the class falling, then you know, okay, it didn't even get the class. So that was the problem. Somehow my code didn't add the class. If the code did work, it would look like this when I click it. Then you would see that here it adds the class falling, and you can even see this short purple flash of something happening. You just get an action replay where you can see, look, here the class is added, and that's very useful for stuff happening in JavaScript. But let's say that this actually worked, that the class did get added. For instance, if we do like this, we click it, it says add class, and we saw the purple flash up here, and it certainly is falling, the class is added. But the box still isn't moving. And especially when now we have just a ball and a box, but when you have multiple elements called almost the same, like coin 1, coin 2, coin 3, it gets harder and harder to distinguish. And you probably noticed that falling is on the ball and not on the box. And I always recommend using this to select the element and hover on it and click and say, is it here? Or here, is it on any of these? Is it on the sprite or on the container? And it's not. You can see here, it does not show up. So it did get added, but on the wrong element. But it could also be that it was on the right element, but maybe it was on the sprite where it should have been on the container, or vice versa. Let's say that the result you want is for the box to rotate and fall. This is what we would want. But if we don't get that result, but we get this here, it just rotates, then of course we look, but on the classes we had rotate added and we have falling added, and it's on the right element, it's on the box. But is it correct? Because right now it looks like rotate works, but falling does not work. And then we have to say, okay, but a rotation or a thing like that, that's usually done on the sprite, whereas something that moves it would usually be done on the container. So if we swap them around, then it works, and the sprite cannot be falling, but it can rotate. Rotate. A good trick is, if it looks like it works a bit but not quite, then was it the correct one? Was it the container or was it the sprite? Or maybe even worse, if we added both to the container or both to the sprite. To try to swap them around, The sprite is usually for small transform animations or things that change the look of the element, whereas the container is for moving the element around on the page. So in this example, we click the box, we can see the classes are added. We have falling and we have rotate. They are added here, and they are here. And rotate is on the sprite as it should be, and falling on the container as it should be. So why doesn't this work? And then the question is, are the classes the ones that we want? Is it the falling class that we want? We can see that it's added, but we can't see any CSS. There's nothing here. If we had another class like disappear here that was added, then we would see the CSS for disappear showing up. So a class added would also show its CSS, but falling does not have any CSS here. So that means that there's no class named falling. And that is probably because someone was editing the CSS and forgot. But let's see if that did any change. Yeah, it's already falling. And I just have to refresh here and click. See, it's falling. And now we can see the CSS code for it. And I'm guessing the rotate, that's the same. There's no code. So there's probably no class named rotate, and there isn't because I messed it up and called it rotation. I mixed up the keyframe name and the animation name. And now they work. But let's say that the class does get added. The CSS is there. The animation is there. But it still does not work. So now we are in CSS land completely. The CSS doesn't work. And for instance, I'll rotate here. You'll see, oh, there's an error message, invalid property value. And I can see I actually wrote animation name and then I used the short form. So I intended to do this. And now that works. There's no error in the CSS. But then the falling animation, that looks fine. There's no errors here. There would be if there had been an error in the keyframe, it would tell me. So I'm kind of at a loss here. But if you open the page in Firefox and look at it here, then you'll be able to see a bit more. Because when we click it, we get the same. See here, there was an error. I can fix that in the browser. And this one, you can see there's some tiny, next to the keyframes here, there's some tiny information that says top has no effect on this element since it's not a positioned element. Try setting its position property to something other than static. And then I'm looking at my container and say, oh my, I forgot the position absolute. So Firefox is extremely helpful here and tells us when we have CSS that doesn't actually, that doesn't work. There's nothing wrong with it. It just won't work because of other CSS we have. So if I do these fixes in my code here, I add the position absolute and I change the animation name, and then I can refresh it, and if I click it, it works. And I can also see now they're not grayed out, these keyframes. Everything works, everything is great. So if you can't see the error in Chrome, then check it if it is in Firefox. There is one final pesky error that none of the browsers will tell you anything about, and this is it. When we have the class falling, it's added, and we can see we have the animation. There are no error messages anywhere in Chrome, and if I take my Firefox browser, it's the same. There are no error messages, nothing is wrong, it just doesn't work. And this really annoys me, that it doesn't tell me that something is wrong, because there's clearly missing and very very important parameter. Here I set the animation name. That is my keyframe, my animation keyframes. Here are my keyframes, but I misspelled it. I forgot that it should be _kf, and they don't tell me. So if you do stuff like that, just double check. Can you actually see the keyframes down here? Because on the rotation where it works, you can see you have the keyframes. And also in Chrome, it shows at the very bottom, it shows the keyframes. So if they aren't there, then you misspelled the name of your animation. So let's just fix that. And now it works. So these are some of the most common problems you will encounter when trying to add classes and it just doesn't work. It's checking if the class gets added, if it's added to the correct element, and is it on the container or the sprite as it should be? Is it even the correct class? Does the class exist in the CSS? And does the CSS work? Check everything in that order, and then you'll be on your way to be a professional bug basher.